What if the most intense global competition of our lifetime isn't actually about, military might or political ideology?
Right, not the big flashy stuff we see on the news.
Exactly. What if the true test of governance is the much more mundane day-to-day challenge of ensuring hundreds of millions of people can afford a good life,
Yeah.
an affordable apartment, quality health care, a safe community, things like that?
That is precisely the point that gets, I think, completely missed in Western media narratives,
Mm.
especially when they talk about rising powers, particularly China.
Mm.
The story we're constantly told is one of, inevitable collapse of economic failure or this deeply dystopian society. But
Right.
what happens when that narrative completely, and I mean completely, clashes with the lived reality that travelers, residents, and even corporate executives are seeing?
The people on the ground.
The people on the ground who are now openly admitting that the society they're visiting is, well, it's functional, it's innovative, and it's getting really, really competitive.
And that clash, that gap between perception and reality, that's the core of what we're getting into in this deep dive.
It is.
We put together a pretty substantial stack of sources. We're pulling from detailed economic analyses, some surprising tech endorsements from U.S. industry leaders, geopolitical surveys, and some really personal anecdotes about the, frankly, crushing cost of living in the West compared to the affordability you find elsewhere.
Hmm.
So our mission here is to synthesize all this material. We want to focus on correcting some of those pervasive Western stereotypes and really highlight the data points that should be causing some serious strategic reflection in places like Washington and Detroit.
Yeah, and we're aiming for absolute nuance here. It's important to say that. Every system has its flaws, of course.
Of course.
But the source material just demands that we move beyond the familiar headlines and understand the genuine complexity of what's happening in China's current economic and technological transition. We need to understand not just what they're doing, but, why they're doing it and what that means for us.
Before we go further, make sure to hit subscribe and support Geo9. Okay, so let's unpack this. I think we should start with what we're calling the perception gap.
Good place to start.
It's this difference between the narrative that's sold to Western audiences and the reality that people observe on the ground. The prevailing Western stereotype is, you said it, that China is this draconian, controlled society where joy is essentially illegal.
It sounds absurd when you say it out loud like that, doesn't it? But the critique points out that this narrative is so deeply ingrained.
Yeah.
The source material shared this perfect anecdote to illustrate the cognitive dissonance. Someone posted a simple video, really short, just a few seconds long. It was of their kids just happily playing a casual game of badminton in a park.
Okay, sounds harmless.
You'd think so. But the instantaneous reaction from some of the Western audience was not, oh, cute kids. It was this suspicious immediate labeling of the video as government propaganda.
Propaganda for playing badminton.
For badminton, exactly. The assumption was that the government must have directed this person to film their kids having fun because according to this deeply held stereotype, a Chinese family can't just be enjoying a spontaneous moment in public.
What?
The response was literally, you can't show them having fun here. No fun allowed. It highlights this almost pathological need within the narrative to deny any sense of normalcy or quality of life in China.
And that really sets the stage for the systematic narrative we're fed constantly, which the sources kind of distill into 4 major bullet points.
The 4 horsemen of the collapse narrative.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. 1, the economy is crashing. 2, demographics are collapsing. 3, the youth are all unhappy. And 4, the real estate market is about to implode catastrophically.
And you hear those 4 points over and over and over again. And they create a very comfortable picture for the West, right? A failing competitor we don't really need to worry about.
Right, it's reassuring.
It is. But the profound disconnect happens when you actually go there. Even a short trip immediately triggers that moment of dissonance, where a visitor realizes the society they are physically seeing is thriving, it's fast-moving, it's incredibly functional. A total contradiction to the disaster scenario painted by the media.
This travel experience seems so crucial, and it links directly to what the sources identify as the cornerstone of cooperation. It's not about ignoring challenges. Every country has them.
Of course.
But the gap between perception and reality is just so immense that it actively prevents any kind of constructive dialogue. If we constantly view a major global partner through this negative, failing lens, we can't possibly work with them effectively.
And that failure to cooperate has real global consequences. The source material really stresses this. When the U.S. and China do work together on things like climate change, global pandemics, economic stability, the whole world benefits.
Yeah.
For those with, skin in the game, people with kids who are half Chinese, expats who live and work across both systems, future generations whose prosperity relies on global stability fostering, understanding isn't optional. It's essential to stop this continuous adversarial posturing from leading to, well, disaster.
So let's move to the most contested of those 4 bullet points, which is this idea of economic realities and the constant assertion that the economy is crashing. If we actually look at the facts and figures in our source analysis, that narrative just falls apart immediately.
It really does, but it's important to analyze why that narrative persists. Western analysis often compares China's current situation to its hyper-growth phase, back in the 90s and 2000s, where 10, 12% growth was normal.
Right, so anything less looks like failure.
Exactly. So when growth moderates to 5%, it gets labeled a slowdown or a collapse.
But 5% growth on an economy the size of China it's a staggering achievement. The source material provides the perfect scale for this.
It does.
5% growth today is equivalent to adding an economy the size of Thailand, a major functioning nation, every single year.
Every year.
That's not a collapse. That's the creation of massive, sustained new wealth and productivity year after year.
And the sources also emphasize where this growth is happening globally. If you look at overall global GDP expansion, the real engine room of world growth is now overwhelmingly in Asia. It's driven by China and India.
Mm-hmm.
In contrast, a lot of developed economies, especially in Europe, have had near stagnation for years.
Mm.
So that contextualizes China's 5% as robust and leading, not failing.
So here's when we need to look closer at the maturing real estate market, which is that 4th major narrative of failure that gets pushed in the West. The idea that this real estate bubble is about to wipe out their whole economy.
Well, to understand the current transition, you really have to look back at the years of wild speculative growth. The source host shared his own personal experience in Shanghai between 2007 and 2015.
Mm.
He bought an apartment in 2009 and just 6 years later sold it for a profit of nearly 400%.
400%. That's insane.
It is insane.
Yeah.
And that was typical of the era. Ridiculous, unrepeatable capital gains driven by speculation, where housing was treated purely as a rapid wealth generation tool.
That sounds more like a casino than a sustainable housing system.
Yeah.
And that brings us to this critical Tokyo maturity comparison, which I think provides the necessary context for what China is trying to do now.
Yeah, this part is fascinating. The source recounts an expat in Japan who bought a really desirable apartment 20 years ago. When he sold it recently, he realized zero capital gains.
Zero.
Zero. He sold it for the exact same price he had purchased it for 2 decades earlier. He'd lost investment potential, obviously, because that capital could have earned interest elsewhere. But crucially, he hadn't lost the principal.
So in a truly mature market like Tokyo, housing has just stopped being an investment vehicle. It's purely an asset for living. And this reveals this profound shift in philosophy happening in China today. The government is actively trying to transition the market away from that speculative boom mentality toward maturity.
They're attempting to adopt a philosophy where housing is seen primarily as a place to live, a basic necessity, rather than a volatile tool for making crazy profits.
Which stabilizes society. It ensures housing stays accessible.
Exactly. But it inevitably makes the ultra-wealthy speculators, the ones who enjoyed those 400% returns, very, very unhappy. So the implosion narrative you hear is often just the sound of speculation being choked off, not the collapse of fundamental value.
And this transition is fascinating because it links directly to the next huge topic: quality of life dictated by affordability. In the U.S., the highly speculative nature of all asset classes, including housing and healthcare, just feeds into massive cost volatility. And that brings us to the great cost of living divide.
Yeah, the sources make this comparison incredibly sharp and personal. The increasing, honestly difficult to comprehend cost of living in the U.S. is the #1 driver of anxiety. Particularly the dramatic price rises over the last 18 months, which are just not being matched by wage growth for the average person.
Let's detail some of these specific U.S. cost examples because they're pretty eye-watering. Health insurance. It's a non-negotiable expense for most families, and it's spiraling out of control.
Mm-hmm.
The source provided data for a family of 5. Their coverage jumped from $12,295 a month last year to $1,535 a month this year.
That is a huge jump.
It's an 18% increase year over year. That's over $18,000 a year just for the privilege of having insurance before you even get to deductibles.
And it's not just the big ticket items, it's groceries.
Yeah.
The absolute fundamentals of existence are becoming budget killers.
Let's talk about eggs.
Yeah, eggs. The sources highlight this massive price spread. The cheapest option, maybe 50 cents per egg, so $6 a dozen. But if you're trying to buy high-quality, free-range organic eggs, you are easily paying $1 per egg.
$12 for a dozen eggs.
$12 for a dozen eggs. The necessity of basic protein is becoming a luxury item for a lot of middle-class families.
And this sets up this bizarre reversal of dining out versus staying in. Traditionally, preparing meals at home is the most cost-effective thing to do.
Right.
But the source points out that buying quality proteins and specialty ingredients in the U.S., like good cuts of steak, fresh produce, spices, it's become so prohibitively expensive that the initial outlay for a decent home-cooked meal is just massive.
Which dramatically shifts the comparison when you look at dining out in China.
Hmm.
Contrast a U.S. dining bill. A typical family of 5 going out for a nice but not, extravagant dinner could easily hit $200 with tips and drinks. Now look at the Chinese comparison provided in the sources. An indulgent, high-quality delivery meal from a Michelin-star Cantonese restaurant, 7 full dishes, costing only 340 RMB.
And 340 RMB is what, roughly $50 U.S. equivalent?
Roughly $50. A family can experience a high-end culinary event for a quarter of the price of a standard U.S. meal. The difference is just stark.
You can even see it in the international chains. The source noted that high-quality Chinese hot pot chains, like Haidilao, often cost a family of $250 to $300 in the U.S. because of pricing and location costs.
And this brings us to Chinese affordability, which is often framed not as consumer discount, but as a real commitment to essential utilities. The sources share this really telling story, the taxi driver anecdote.
Yeah, this was great. The U.S. host was discussing his utility costs with a Chinese taxi driver who was just absolutely shocked by the numbers.
He couldn't believe it.
He was incredulous that a U.S. phone bill could run around 1,000 RMB a month, and then home internet is another 700 to 800 RMB. That's 2,200 RMB a month.
Over $300 US, just to communicate and get online. That kind of expense would be crippling for a lot of Chinese workers.
Right.
The reality in China is that public transit, like the metro system, costs cents. 50 cents to $1 per ride. And crucially, essential communication services are treated as infrastructure, not luxury goods. High data phone plans with 80+ gigs of 5G coverage cost under $30 US a month.
Wow.
The mandate is high quality, universal, and affordable access.
And this is where that U.S. dissonance sets in. Americans live in a country that's constantly praised as the richest and most developed country in the world, yet they're forced to confront the reality of living paycheck to paycheck, struggling with these daily cost pressures, and watching necessities like healthcare and housing just eat away at any gains they make.
That internal conflict is corrosive. They're working harder than ever, often holding multiple jobs, but their tangible quality of life either stagnates or declines. They're paying massive taxes, but they aren't seeing those taxes translate into affordable utilities, functional infrastructure, or manageable healthcare costs.
And that leads to this profound question being asked, particularly by the younger generation. Where is the benefit of living in this wealthy nation, and where is my tax money actually going? If this perspective feels useful, take a second to subscribe to Geo9. It genuinely pushes me to keep bringing more research stories.
Okay, let's pivot from financial strain to what might be the most strategically significant shift detailed in our source material, the innovation reversal. For decades, the Western perception was that China was just the copycat nation, right?
Yeah.
Specializing in OEM manufacturing, original equipment manufacturing, just churning out products designed somewhere else.
That perception is now fundamentally completely outdated. The sources highlight a major conscious strategic shift over the last decade. They are no longer content to just manufacture for others. They're now designing and innovating internally.
Creating their own mobile phones with distinct features, developing unique operating systems,
And tackling complex, high-capital industries like electric vehicles head-on. The EV industry provides the most immediate and, frankly, shocking proof of this reversal. China invited Tesla into its market, which effectively gave Tesla access to the largest EV market in the world. But at the same time, they pushed their domestic companies to innovate faster, leveraging the entire supply chain ecosystem they had built.
And now we see a complete 180-degree reversal when it comes to intellectual property concerns.
This is the wild part.
It is. The source points to the stunning example of the BYD Mexican concern. BYD, the Chinese EV behemoth, is looking to expand manufacturing into Mexico. But they specifically decided not to locate their factory close to the U.S. border
And why?
because they fear the U.S. might try to steal their technology.
Just think about that reversal for a second. For 20 years, all we heard about was Chinese IP theft. Now, Chinese innovators are viewing the U.S. as a potential corporate espionage threat against their superior technology.
And this isn't just paranoia. This fear is substantiated by the actions of U.S. industry leaders. The source detailed the Ford CEO's endorsement, where he openly admitted to actively testing Chinese EVs.
Right, he was driving a Xiaomi SU7.
He personally drove one and confirmed they were shipping top Chinese models back to Detroit to be broken down and reverse engineered. It's a clear admission that they're playing catch-up.
He was quoted saying that anyone who thinks China is still copying or is behind is ridiculous. He confirmed that Chinese innovation is now demonstrably far ahead, especially in battery tech, integration, and affordability. And this recognition leads to the source's critical proposal, the proposed partnership model.
Yeah, the argument is pretty simple. Trying to ban or tariff Chinese EVs to protect an inferior domestic industry is self-defeating. It only hurts American consumers and workers in the long run.
But what's the alternative?
Instead, U.S. giants like GM or Ford should, well, swallow their pride and enter into joint ventures JVs with Chinese leaders like BYD or XPeng.
Just like the JVs U.S. companies have in China.
Exactly. These partnerships could be used to build high-tech EV factories right in the U.S., employing Americans and leveraging the superior Chinese battery and vehicle platform technology.
So it's a way to sell high-quality EVs at a bargain price point, even with tariffs, while revitalizing U.S. manufacturing.
It is. The source material is brutally honest about this. China's entry-level $14,000 EVs, which are functional, safe, and efficient, would absolutely crush the domestic U.S. market if they were allowed in freely.
Yeah.
U.S. automakers just cannot compete on price or integrated tech right now. So the JV is really the only strategic way to leverage that superiority for domestic benefit.
And crucially, European giants are already waking up to this reality. Volkswagen, a massively established player, invested 700 million euros to acquire 10% of XPeng.
Right.
They did this explicitly to get access to XPeng's advanced technology, not to deny it, but to integrate it into future VW models and stay competitive. They chose partnership and integration over denial and isolation.
And moving beyond cars, you see the same trend in the AI race. For a long time, the consistent mainstream media narrative was that China was permanently trailing the U.S. in AI development by, 1 to 2 years.
They were always playing catch-up, never innovating fundamentally.
And this narrative often fostered a palpable sense of technological arrogance among some U.S. tech leaders. We recall the Sam Altman anecdote, where he reportedly dismissed competitors who were seeking advice, basically telling them they had no chance of catching up to the scale and resources of OpenAI.
The race was supposedly already won.
Supposedly. Then came the emergence of DeepSeek. This was an AI model developed on a comparatively shoestring budget, only about $5 to $6 million. Yet when it was tested rigorously, it was found to be operating at a level higher than the established OpenAI models.
Which fundamentally shocked the Western audience.
It did, because the narrative, the propaganda, had been so effective in convincing Western leaders, investors, and the public that China can't innovate. The assumption was that any meaningful breakthroughs had to come from Silicon Valley.
Which brings us to the key consequence of propaganda. The source material argues very powerfully that anti-China propaganda primarily hurts Western countries. By creating a false sense of security and causing the U.S. to drastically underestimate its competition, it breeds complacency. If you genuinely believe your competitor is just copying you and is fundamentally behind, you stop trying to innovate, you cut your R&D budgets, and you fail to recognize the speed at which the goalposts are moving.
The irony is just, it's so thick. The propaganda that was intended to hurt China ends up making America strategically weaker by blinding it to reality.
We can see these crumbling narratives on multiple fronts now, and it's leading to this palpable shift in global opinion. A major factor that catalyzed this was the physical opening of borders after the pandemic.
That decision was massive. For many years, getting a Chinese visa was a famously difficult process, often labeled as, troublesome.
Right.
But the recent lifting of visa restrictions for dozens of countries, including the entire EU, Australia, and New Zealand, just drastically lowered the barrier to entry. Now, a European traveler can just book a flight and go visa-free for 2 weeks, allowing them to experience the reality on the ground firsthand.
And this physical access, combined with digital exposure, created what the sources are calling the three-pronged attack on misinformation. It's accelerating this change in global perception.
The first prong was the TikTok refugee effect. When TikTok faced regulatory threats and potential bans in the U.S., users who were already drawn to the content and lifestyle glimpses shared from China just migrated to other platforms like Xiaohongshu or Little Red Note.
So they were actively seeking out content that wasn't being filtered by traditional Western media.
Exactly. The second prong was the rise of common travelers and non-affiliated vloggers. These are people who travel everywhere, and when they started visiting China post-lockdown, their videos were just flooded with mind-blown reaction.
Weren't political at all.
Not at all. They were just documenting the modern infrastructure,
Yeah.
the safety, the functionality of the society, and it contradicted everything they had been told.
And the third prong involved mainstream influencers. The sources highlighted iShowSpeed's highly viewed live streams, which reached a massive, non-political, young audience. He just streamed a normal, cool society, and that normalized the image of China in a way that academic studies or newspaper articles never could.
So the combination of those three factors has forced a much more balanced debate online.
And this balancing is absolutely essential when we get to sensitive geopolitical topics like the treatment of Chinese students in the U.S. The sources point out the extreme political rhetoric, like the calls from some quarters to expel all 300,000 Chinese students currently studying in America.
A position that just ignores the foundational facts and the economic reality. International students are a massive economic driver for the U.S. They pay full, often exorbitant tuition fees, which subsidizes a lot of struggling U.S. universities.
They contribute tens of billions to the U.S. economy.
Tens of billions. And strategically, the sources confirm that the majority of people leading cutting-edge U.S. AI development today have Chinese names. They are Chinese students who stayed, became naturalized citizens, and are now driving American technological superiority.
The failure of the China Initiative is a tragic testament to how this anti-immigrant sentiment harms the U.S. This was a U.S. government program, launched with a lot of fanfare, and it targeted Chinese professors across the U.S. trying to find cases of espionage or substantial links back to the Chinese government.
And after years of scrutiny, the sources confirmed the initiative was a catastrophic failure. They failed to find a single case of substantial links, but the damage done was immense.
Professors were publicly accused, put through financially devastating legal battles, lost their jobs, had their research funding canceled. Their lives were ruined under false suspicion.
And the inevitable consequence was a massive brain drain. Feeling targeted and unwelcome, a huge amount of top-tier Chinese scientific and academic talent chose to leave the U.S., returning to China or moving to other countries. This was an enormous American loss.
Furthermore, the source debunks one of the most persistent conspiratorial claims used to justify the initiative.
Oh, the idea that all 300,000 students are a mass espionage network.
Exactly, that they're all covertly briefed by the government before they leave and debriefed when they return. The source speaker personally vouched for over 50 students they knew who studied in the U.S. and confirmed that none of them were ever questioned, debriefed, or instructed by the Chinese government. It's a narrative designed to dehumanize and justify suspicion.
And this failure to hold on to talent, combined with this disastrous perception gap, brings us to a crucial reflection on global opinion and the BRICS effect.
Yeah.
If U.S. policymakers need one data point to serve as a strategic wake-up call, this is it.
This one is a big one.
We're talking about the Alliance of Democracy survey. It's a major, credible poll that canvassed 110,000 people across 110 countries worldwide, and the core finding is staggering.
Get this, 79% of people globally now report having a higher impression of China than of America.
79%. That is not a small margin. It's a monumental gap in global favorability. If you are the established superpower, and nearly 4/5 of the world views your primary strategic rival more favorably, you have a massive problem.
So where does that come from?
The sources explain that this is largely a reflection of external perceptions of U.S. behavior, the ongoing involvement in foreign wars, the policy instability caused by constant internal political chaos, and the perception of selfishness or transactionalism in foreign policy. This data confirms it's the culmination of years of decisions and actions, not just simple propaganda.
And this negative external perception has real, tangible geopolitical consequences. It's driving powerful momentum for organizations like BRICS, which is growing in influence and actively challenging U.S. geopolitical dominance.
It's also accelerating the global move away from using the U.S. dollar for trade settlement. When the world loses faith in the stability and reliability of the U.S. system, they start looking for alternatives.
The sources really drive home the idea that the anti-China propaganda bubble mainly hurts Americans by shielding them from the reality of this global sentiment. It encourages policymakers to assume U.S. leadership is unquestioned, when the reality is that the U.S. is rapidly losing the global public opinion battle.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about some of the cultural and governance contrasts, because this is where the fundamental difference in what a society values becomes most apparent. One of the greatest philosophical divisions is around the concept of freedom and safety.
Yeah. The source material contrasts the highly individualistic American perspective, particularly the hardcore Republican view, that guns equal freedom and are necessary for personal safety and defense against government overreach. This is a core cultural value rooted in historical independence.
Now, contrast that with the Chinese perspective. Because of strict gun control and the near total absence of firearms in society, Chinese citizens feel extremely safe.
Right.
They don't fear mass shootings, they don't fear casual armed robbery, and they feel comfortable allowing their children to roam freely.
For them, the absence of guns is the definition of safety and freedom. Freedom from the fear of violence. And it's so critical to recognize that you cannot judge one system through the cultural lens of the other. The two cultures just have fundamentally different definitions of what makes a free and safe society.
This philosophical divergence is also profound when we look at family versus individualism. The typical modern U.S. model dictates extreme independence. At 18, the child is an adult, and they're often told, off you go, there's the front door.
Right. The focus is on the individual's journey and self-reliance, even if it means geographical or emotional separation.
The traditional Chinese model emphasizes familial and community support. The source describes these scenarios rooted in tradition. The entire village pooling money to make sure a sick member gets medical treatment, or multiple generations of a family pooling resources to build a house for a newly married couple.
The prosperity of the individual is just inextricably linked to the prosperity of the unit, the family, and the community.
And this cultural difference had a deeply personal impact on the source speaker. He recounts that after living in China and observing the priority his colleagues placed on familial ties, he realized he needed to reevaluate his own life choices.
Yeah.
He made it a personal mission to fly to Iowa to visit his grandmother every year for 3 consecutive years, prioritizing that time while she was still alive.
That's a deeply reflective moment.
Yeah.
He was the only one of 20-plus grandkids who prioritized those regular distant visits. And here's the powerful contrast. When she eventually passed, he didn't feel the need to go to the funeral because he knew he had already paid his respects by prioritizing the years she was alive.
Meanwhile, his cousins, who had rarely visited, all showed up for the funeral.
And he attributes that prioritization of time and respect directly to the lessons he learned about the importance of family while living in China.
This model of communal support connects directly to the system of governance and the concept of common prosperity, which is a direct opposition to ultra-capitalism. We look at the findings of the Harvard study, a decade-long effort which concluded that the Chinese government is genuinely popular and widely supported among the majority of its people.
But the study had a crucial caveat. The government is decidedly unpopular among the ultra-wealthy. And this begs the question, why are the ultra-rich unhappy?
Because common prosperity is designed to decrease privilege for the few to improve the lives of the many.
Precisely. The Shenzhen teacher case study illustrates the policy mechanism perfectly. A specific elementary school teacher became famous for her outstanding instruction. Consequently, the real estate prices around her school just boomed catastrophically.
Creating a housing moat?
A housing moat, exactly, where only the ultra-wealthy could afford to buy homes nearby and secure their children access to this superior education.
So to uphold the ideal that all students should benefit, common prosperity, the government intervened. They moved the top teacher out of the physical classroom and put her online, broadcasting her lessons to every single student in the district.
Which immediately lowered the perceived value of the physical real estate around the school, reducing the advantage the rich had tried to buy and democratizing access to the educational resource.
It's a clear policy choice to decrease privilege for the benefit of the whole, even if it makes the real estate speculators furious. And this system contrasts horrifically with the U.S. capitalist mentality, especially in the healthcare industry.
The source highlights a team of Chinese researchers who successfully cured type 1 diabetes in a team effort. This should be a moment of global celebration for curing a devastating disease.
It should be. Yet the most cynical response came from the U.S. financial sector. The sources cite this infamous Goldman Sachs article that questioned whether curing patients is a sustainable business model.
Unbelievable.
They raised concerns about profitability if chronic diseases were eliminated.
That headline perfectly captures the ethical chasm. The U.S. system operates a healthcare industry where profits rely on continuous management of chronic illness and high-cost procedures. China aims for a healthcare system focused on public well-being and the eradication of disease.
One is fundamentally structured for profit maximization, the other for public benefit.
Hmm.
Finally, let's wrap up this contrast by reflecting on U.S. political division, which feeds into the instability that the rest of the world observes with growing alarm. We often talk about external threats, but the deepest instability is internal.
It really is. The sources cite a USA Today poll that provides a stunning perspective on modern tribalism. While 96% of Americans now accept interracial marriage, which is a fantastic sign of social progress,
It is.
the same poll found that nearly 70% of Republicans and 68% of Democrats are against interparty marriage.
Think about the implications of that. Americans are widely accepting of marrying across racial lines, but when it comes to marrying someone from the opposing political party, 2/3 of the nation says absolutely not.
It illustrates an extreme, tribal, almost cult-like political division that makes the U.S. feel far from united.
And this relentless political division causes policy instability. Continuous reversals, tariffs on, tariffs off, trade agreements canceled. It makes long-term planning impossible for global corporations.
As companies cited, and the sources noted, they can't even give accurate financial guidance because the political environment makes every decision a liability, contributing further to global uncertainty and driving the shift toward organizations like BRICS.
So what does this all mean when we synthesize the findings? When you look past the headlines and the propaganda, and you compare the economic, technological, and cultural realities in both the U.S. and China, the people in both countries fundamentally want the exact same things.
They do.
Affordable living, a safe community, a good job, and a better life for their children.
They're just approaching these universal goals through radically different systems and processes. One, through ultra-capitalism, extreme individualism, and highly polarized democracy, and the other through a form of managed, market-driven socialism with Chinese characteristics, emphasizing familial, communal support and stability.
And the core lesson here, which is driven home by the sources, is that having the right to vote for a leader does not automatically guarantee an improving quality of life, especially if daily costs are crippling and essential needs are unmet. Democracy, socialism, communism, these are all just forms of government, none of which are inherently superior if they fail to meet the basic economic needs and quality of life expectations of the majority of their citizens.
Then we have to remember the crucial instruction shared in the sources.
Right.
If you look at China through the American lens, seeking individualism and political friction, it will never make sense.
Yeah.
You have to see it through its own cultural perspective, appreciating the nuance, the priority placed on safety, stability, and collective prosperity. That's the only way to avoid the propaganda trap.
So how do you see it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join Geo9 so you don't miss the next insight. We encourage you to be curious, to travel, and to seek the nuance beyond the headlines. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.